Hello, listener. Before I tell you what's happening in Phoenix right now, I need you to think about something that every person who has ever lived in Arizona understands on a cellular level. The desert kills you quietly, not dramatically, not with warning, not with the theatrical violence of a flood or a tornado or an earthquake. It gives you something to push against. The desert kills you the way a furnace kills you, which is to say it just removes the conditions necessary for life, steadily and without particular interest in your opinion about it. People who move here from other states learn this in their first summer, and the ones who respect it survive, and the ones who don't become statistics in the Maricopa County heat-related fatality reports that come out every August. Arizona doesn't negotiate with you about the heat. You negotiate with it, or you don't negotiate at all. I'm telling you this because what's happening in the Valley of the Sun right now involves the heat. And the heat is going to be part of every decision you make tonight if you're listening in the Phoenix metro area. It is currently 118 degrees Fahrenheit at 2:14 p.m. on a Saturday in July. That is not the hottest day Phoenix has ever seen, but it is the 7th consecutive day above 115. And the forecast shows no relief until at least Tuesday. The Salt River Project grid has been running at 94% capacity for 3 days, and rolling blackout warnings are already in effect for parts of the East Valley. 118 degrees is not an abstraction in July in Phoenix. It is the immediate reality pressing against every window and door of every building you're inside of right now. And whatever you do tonight, wherever you go, you do not go outside without water. And you do not stay outside for more than a few minutes without shade. That's always true in Phoenix in July. Tonight, it is more true than it has ever been. My name is David Morgan, and I do the afternoon show on 99.7 FM here in Phoenix. I'm supposed to be running a best of summer countdown right now, with listener votes and dedications, and the kind of Saturday afternoon content that makes the heat feel slightly less personal. Instead, at 1:59 p.m., my field reporter Elena Cruz called me from Tempe Marketplace, which is an outdoor shopping complex on the southeast side of the valley that on a normal Saturday would be mostly empty in July, because only tourists and newcomers try to shop in an outdoor mall when it's 118 degrees. Today is not a normal Saturday because the marketplace is hosting a summer arts festival that's been running since this morning in the shaded pavilion areas, and according to the attendance numbers Elena gave me before she called, there are approximately 6,000 people on the property. Elena was there to do a light feature segment for Afternoon Drive. Community event, local artists, color story about people finding ways to enjoy culture in spite of the heat. That was the assignment. At 1:59 p.m., she called me, and the first thing she said was not anything about the assignment. She said, "David, something is wrong with one of the security guards." By the time I got on the air at 2:14 p.m., something was wrong with considerably more than one security guard. Here's what Elena told me in the 9 minutes between her first call and when I went live. At approximately 1:47 p.m., a security guard stationed at the north entrance of the Tempe Marketplace pavilion collapsed without warning and was unresponsive when other staff arrived to help. An on-site medical response team, the kind that events this size are required to have, began treatment immediately. Standard protocol for heat-related emergency, which in July in Phoenix is the most common medical call at any outdoor event, regardless of how much shade and water is available. At 1:52 p.m., 5 minutes after collapsing, the security guard attacked the medical technician who was treating him. Not confused and disoriented, not striking out from the pain of being handled, attacking, specifically, biting, with what Elena described as absolute focused aggression, no hesitation, no reaction to pain when the technician's colleagues tried to pull him off. The guard bit the technician on the arm, and when pulled away, went immediately for another person nearby, a bystander who had stopped to watch the medical response. By the time additional security responded, a guard had bitten 3 people in approximately 90 seconds. At 1:58 p.m., the first person bitten by the guard, the medical technician, began showing symptoms. Rapid onset fever. Helena said she could see it. The man's face changed color in minutes. He started sweating in a way that looked wrong given the conditions. And then at 2:03 p.m., approximately 11 minutes after being bitten, he attacked a colleague who was trying to help him. This is when Alana called me the second time and told me to get on the air now. And this time her voice was different from the first call. And the difference told me everything I needed to know about how quickly this had changed. At 2:14 p.m., from what Elena can observe from her position near the South Pavilion, where she backed away to after the second call, there are at least 7 people in the northern section of the marketplace showing the violent behavior. 7 in 27 minutes from one security guard. And the 6,000 people at this festival are in a partially enclosed outdoor shopping complex in 118-degree heat with limited exits and vehicle access. That, on a Saturday afternoon, means the parking structures are full and the access roads are backed up and nobody is getting out of here quickly. I need every person in the Phoenix metro area to understand one thing clearly before I continue. The Tempe marketplace is not the only place this is happening. At 2:16 p.m., Scottsdale Fire Department responded to a violent incident at a resort on the northeastern edge of the city. At 2:18 p.m., NCSO received an emergency call from the Chandler Fashion Center involving multiple people attacking others in the food court. At 2:19 p.m., Phoenix Police Dispatch logged the first of what would become 17 separate violent incident calls from across the city in the next 12 minutes, all describing the same pattern of behavior. People attacking others with focused aggression. Biting is the primary method of assault. No response to pain or verbal commands. And victims of those bites showing rapid onset of symptoms and transitioning to the same violent behavior within minutes of exposure. This is not a Tempe marketplace incident. This is a valley-wide emergency. At 2:22 p.m., I need to tell you something about Phoenix that shapes everything that comes next. Because if you're not from here, you might not understand the geography of what we're dealing with. The Phoenix metropolitan area, which includes Phoenix, Tempe, Scottsdale, Mesa, Chandler, Gilbert, Glendale, Peoria, and the other cities of the valley, contains approximately 5 million people spread across roughly 14,000 square miles of desert. That's not a misprint. 14,000 square miles. The density is low compared to coastal cities, which in normal emergencies is an advantage because people aren't packed together. In this emergency, low density creates a different problem, which is that 5 million people in 14,000 square miles, a 118-degree desert, cannot walk anywhere. There is no walking to safety in Phoenix in July. Every person who is not currently in a climate-controlled building is in immediate danger from 2 different sources simultaneously. And I cannot emphasize this enough. The infected are dangerous and the heat is deadly. And right now, both of them are outside. At 2:25 p.m., Elena is still on the line. She's positioned herself behind a locked staff door in the South Pavilion area, a metal door that opens inward, and she's giving me updates from a gap at the bottom of the door. 6,000 people in the marketplace complex, increasingly aware that something is wrong, not yet panicking, but moving in the unorganized way that precedes panic in crowds, and approximately 15 infected individuals now visible in various sections of the property. Alina is 26 years old and has been a field reporter for 2 years, and she is describing this to me in the focused, accurate voice of someone who has decided that reporting is what she's going to do, because reporting is what she can do. The temperature outside the door she's hiding behind is 118 degrees. Phoenix Fire Department issued a mass casualty incident declaration at 2:27 p.m. If you received an emergency alert on your phone in the past few minutes, that's what it was. The alert directs residents to shelter in place, avoid areas of violent incident, Call 911 for emergencies and monitor official channels for updates. What the alert does not explain, because official alerts are designed to inform without creating panic, and sometimes that restraint costs people. Information they need is that the violent incidents it's directing you to avoid are not random or isolated. They are connected. They spread from person to person through bytes. And in the past 40 minutes, they have appeared at 16 separate locations across the 5-city metropolitan area that contains 5 million people. At 2:31 p.m., Elena updated me from under the door gap. The crowd in the North Pavilion has begun moving toward the South Pavilion, where she is, which means in approximately 10 minutes, Elena's locked staff door is going to have 6,000 people on the other side of it, some number of whom are infected, and an untold number of whom were in proximity to infected individuals and have been bitten and are currently in the symptom window between exposure and transition. Elena, I need to tell you something that you probably already know. When that crowd reaches your door, you cannot open it for them. Not because those people don't deserve help, because if any of them were bitten and you open that door before you can assess them, everything behind that door becomes compromised. I know what I'm asking you to do. I know it goes against every instinct you have. She said, I know, David. I know. The sun is hitting 118 degrees in Phoenix, Arizona, and 6,000 people at a summer arts festival are about to find out that the worst day of the year in the desert just got worse. Stay on this frequency. This is 99.7 FM, and we're not going anywhere. The crowd reached Alana's door at 2:37 p.m. She could hear them before she could see them through the gap. The sound of 6,000 people moving together with fear leading the way, which is a sound that has a specific frequency you can feel in your chest. She described it to me as like standing too close to a speaker that's playing something too loud, the vibration arriving before the sound resolves into anything identifiable. She stayed behind the door. She did not open it. I'm going to tell you that now, and I'm going to tell you again later, because it's important that you understand what that required. At 2:39 p.m., my station manager Jake Torres arrived. Jake is 55 years old, a Phoenix native who grew up in South Mountain, and who has been managing radio stations in this market for 28 years, and who called me at 2:22 p.m. when he heard the broadcast beginning and said 5 words. I'm coming in right now. He walked in at 2:39 p.m., which means he drove across Phoenix at 2 in the afternoon on a July Saturday in a heat emergency, and got here in 17 minutes. And I'm going to let you draw your own conclusions about what Jake Torres was doing in terms of traffic laws to accomplish that. Jake brought 3 things. A case of water, because he's a Phoenix native, and he doesn't go anywhere without water in July. His personal radio scanner, which he takes everywhere, because he's been a radio man for 28 years and old habits are physical. And the legal pad, because Jake Torres thinks better with a legal pad. He sat down at the secondary board, plugged in his scanner, and started writing without saying anything to me, because he understood immediately that the only thing I needed from him right now was exactly what he was doing. At 2:42 p.m., Jake's scanner began confirming a picture of the valley that I need to share with you comprehensively, because you need to understand the geographic scale of what we're dealing with. Phoenix police have active violent incident responses at 7 locations across the city. Scottsdale police have 4. Chandler PD has 3. Mesa PD has 5. Tempe PD, in addition to the marketplace situation, has 2 additional locations. That's 21 confirmed response sites across the valley in the 55 minutes since the first incident at the marketplace. Jake looked at those locations on the map he was drawing on his legal pad and said something that he's given me permission to share. He said it looks like it started in multiple places at once, or it started in one place and moved so fast in the first 30 minutes that we missed the spread entirely. Either answer is disturbing in a way that I'm going to sit with rather than resolve. At 2:45 p.m., Dr. Rachel Kim called the station. Dr. Kim is an infectious disease physician at Banner University Medical Center in Phoenix, and she called because she'd been treating patients from the early incidents, as she wanted the public to have accurate information faster than official channels could provide it. She said she's seen 4 cases progress from bite exposure to full transition, and based on those observations, she has clinical data that everyone in the Phoenix metro area needs. She said the timeline from bite to behavioral transition is averaging 22 minutes in the cases she's observed, but she's seen it as fast as 14 minutes and as slow as 31. And the variability appears to correlate with the severity of the bite wound and the proximity to major blood vessels. She said transmission is exclusively through direct fluid contact with infected saliva, meaning bite wounds and blood exposure. She said there is no treatment once infection is established. Progression is invariable, and the only mitigation she's observed that may affect outcome is the same aggressive immediate wound decontamination that appears in other outbreak accounts she's reviewed tonight. Then she said something that Jake immediately underlined on his legal pad when I relayed it. She said, "I need you to tell everyone something about the heat." She said that in the heat, the biology changes. Prion cascade propagation requires functional protein folding mechanisms, and those mechanisms are temperature sensitive in both directions, not just cold. Extreme heat, sustained at the level Phoenix is experiencing today, accelerates the degradation of the infected in ways we wouldn't see in temperate climates. She said based on her initial observations, infected individuals exposed to sustained outdoor temperatures above 115 degrees are showing accelerated physical deterioration, possibly 60 to 70% faster degradation than baseline. An infected person who would remain mobile for 90 minutes in a 70-degree environment might be immobile in 30 to 40 minutes in this heat. The heat that kills survivors in minutes, if they're outside, is killing the infected faster too. At 2:49 p.m., I broadcast this information, and I want to be clear about what it means and what it doesn't mean. It does not mean going outside is safe. In 118 degrees, an unprotected human being faces heat stroke within 20 to 30 minutes. Faster if they're running or stressed, faster if they're not hydrated. The infected outside are degrading faster than baseline, but they are still dangerous for 20 to 30 minutes after transition, which is the same window in which an unprotected person is accumulating heat injury. Being outside means dying from heat or dying from the infected, and the timelines overlap badly. What it does mean is this: if you are in a secured building with climate control, you are in the best possible position. The infected cannot sustain prolonged outdoor operation in this heat, and if they enter your building through a breach, they are already degraded by whatever time they spent outside getting to you. Time and air conditioning are both on your side. Stay inside. Stay cool. Wait. At 2:53 p.m., the Salt River Project issued a grid stability warning. The combination of record heat demand, the mass casualty emergency drawing unusual power loads from emergency services and hospitals, and the beginning of cascading failures in secondary infrastructure has pushed the SRP grid to 97% capacity. They are warning of possible rolling blackouts lasting 15 to 30 minutes in sequence across the valley, and they are asking commercial users to reduce load immediately. Jake looked at me when I read that off the scanner. A rolling blackout in Phoenix in July is not a minor inconvenience. A 15-minute blackout in 118-degree heat means air conditioning stops, which means interior temperature immediately begins climbing. In a small building or a building with poor insulation, interior temperatures can reach dangerous levels within 30 minutes of AC loss. In a large, well-insulated commercial building with thermal mass, you have longer. But any building without power in this heat is on a clock. At 2:57 p.m., Elena called in. The crowd outside her door has partially dispersed, which means people found other exits or broke through other barriers, and the pressure on her specific location has reduced. Through the door gap, She can see the South Pavilion, which is now about 40% occupied with people who are sheltering against the walls away from the sun exposure areas. And she estimates maybe 8 infected individuals visible in that crowd, moving through it, attacking people in the focused way she described earlier. She says the crowd is trying to get away from the infected by pressing toward the walls, which is compressing them into corners, which is the opposite of useful. Elena, is there any way you can communicate with the people on the other side of that door without opening it? She said there's a window in the door, about head height, frosted glass, and she could break the glass to create a communication point without opening the door. She said she'd been thinking about it. Do it. At 3:01 p.m., Elena broke the frosted glass with a fire extinguisher she found in the staff corridor. And then she spoke through the opening to the people nearest the door. She told them she was a reporter, and she could hear them, and she needed them to hear her. She needed them to stop pressing toward the walls. She needed them to spread out as much as the space allowed. She needed them to identify anyone who had been bitten and create distance from those people immediately, not punitively, not with violence, just distance, because the person who had been bitten needed to be near an exit and away from others in case their condition changed. She said the response from the crowd was a moment of absolute silence, the kind of silence that falls when thousands of people simultaneously understand something has changed. Then someone near the door said, "How do we know who's been bitten?" And Elena said, "Ask them. Most people will tell you the truth when the truth is the only thing that helps." At 3:04 p.m., the situation assessment from Jake's scanner covers the entire valley, and I want to give you the full picture. Phoenix police report that the Camelback Corridor, which is one of the densest commercial corridors in the city, with massive retail developments and restaurants and hotels, has multiple active incidents. The Biltmore Fashion Park, Camelback Road, and the Lincoln Drive Resort Strip in North Phoenix all have confirmed reports. Arizona State University in Tempe, which maintains a summer population of approximately 8,000 students and faculty, has activated its emergency alert system. Scottsdale Healthcare's Osborne campus has declared an internal emergency. The 51 and the 202 freeways both show gridlock in both directions, not from accident, but from the simultaneous attempt of hundreds of thousands of people to evacuate in multiple directions at once. 5 million people in a desert at 118 degrees, trying to figure out where to go when the answer might be nowhere. Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport declared ground stop at 3:07 p.m., diverting incoming flights to Tucson and Las Vegas. For anyone who is planning to fly out of Phoenix today, that option is closed. For anyone whose family members are on inbound flights right now, those flights are landing somewhere else. The airport's decision was based on reports of incidents in Terminal 4 and in the ground transportation areas, which represents the airport experiencing what the stockyards experienced, what the marketplace experienced, which is that high-density public spaces in close contact with large populations are the kindling, and the infected are the spark. At 3:10 p.m., Jake handed me a note. I'm going to read it exactly as he wrote it, because Jake doesn't waste words. It says, if you haven't told them the bite wound decontamination information, tell them now. People need to hear it every 20 minutes, so the ones who need it most don't miss it. Jake is right. Let me say it again. If you have been bitten, if someone near you has been bitten, the window for possible mitigation through aggressive wound decontamination is approximately the first 5 minutes post-exposure. Thorough irrigation with the highest concentration antiseptic available, applied to a depth that is genuinely unpleasant, within 5 minutes of the bite. Dr. Kim has not confirmed this as treatment. She has described it as possible mitigation based on limited observations. There are no guarantees, but the window is small and closing, and if you've been bitten and you're hearing this and you have antiseptic available, you need to use it right now. At 3:13 p.m., the temperature on Jake's car thermometer, which he checked when he parked in our lot 45 minutes ago, was reading 121 in direct sun. The lot is asphalt. The car was sitting in full July afternoon sun. In 121 degrees on an asphalt surface in full sun, an infected individual moving toward a building cannot survive more than 15 minutes before tissue damage becomes too severe for functional mobility. The desert that has been killing people for being unprepared for 200 years is killing the infected too. And somewhere across the Phoenix metro area, 5 million people are about to find out whether the things that make a desert survivable for humans, buildings, air conditioning, water, shade, the things they've built their entire lives around in a place that should by rights be uninhabitable, are going to be enough tonight. Stay on this frequency. Jake and I aren't going anywhere. At 3:17 p.m., the first rolling blackout hit the Ahwatukee foothills area in southeast Phoenix. 15 minutes of no power, then restoration. Jake's scanner caught the SRP notification before it was publicly broadcast, and we got the information out on this frequency 40 seconds before the official alert went to phones, which is 40 seconds that might have mattered for someone who was monitoring the situation and needed those 40 seconds to fill a bathtub or move to an interior room, or anything that preparation provides. 40 seconds doesn't sound like much. Tonight, it's everything. The reason I focus on that 40-second window is because Jake has been doing something while I broadcast that I want to tell you about. He's been calling. Not random calls, systematic ones. He has a contact list he's maintained for 28 years of Phoenix radio. Every emergency manager, every police department public information officer, every hospital communication director, every public works official who ever sat across from him in a meeting about emergency broadcast protocols. He's been calling them in order of most critical to least critical, and he's been feeding me information that those contacts have been sharing, and he's been building a picture of the valley that no single official source has yet put together, because each official source is focused on their own piece. Here's the picture Jake has built as of 3:19 p.m. The infection in the Phoenix metro area did not originate at the Tempe marketplace. The marketplace was the first report that reached a public voice, but Jake's contacts are now telling him the earliest confirmed incident occurred at 6:47 a.m. today at a facility in the East Valley. A medical research institution. Jake is not giving me the specific name because his contact asked him not to until official notification is complete, but he confirmed it's in the Mesa area and it conducts prion research in a laboratory environment. At 6:47 a.m., 2 researchers were involved in an incident that was initially classified as a laboratory accident. By 7:30 a.m., both researchers had transitioned and a 3rd staff member was exposed. By 9 a.m., the facility was locked down internally, and management was attempting to notify authorities through official channels that were, on a Saturday morning in July, slower to respond than the situation required. Between 9 a.m. and noon, 3 exposed individuals who left the facility before full lockdown were in the general population. 3 people in the Phoenix metro area on a Saturday in July who went to restaurants or shopping centers or gyms or anywhere that 6 million people go on a Saturday, carrying something that spreads through bites in a city of 5 million people. The marketplace, the Camelback corridor, the resort strip, the airport. They're not independent outbreaks. They're the expanding rings of 3 people who were in the wrong place at 6:47 this morning and didn't know it. At 3:23 p.m., Elena gave me an update that I want to describe carefully because it contains the most important practical information of the past hour. She has been communicating through the broken window with the crowd in the South Pavilion, and with the help of 2 people immediately on the other side who have taken it on themselves to serve as intermediaries between Elena's voice and the 600 or so people who are now concentrated in that section. Something organized has happened. The crowd has separated into 3 groups. The first group, approximately 400 people, has no visible injuries and is sheltering against the interior walls of the pavilion. The second group, approximately 150 people, has self-identified as having possibly been in proximity to infected individuals, but does not have confirmed bite wounds. The third group, approximately 50 people, has confirmed bite wounds of varying severity, and they have voluntarily moved to the east end of the pavilion near an exterior exit, separating themselves from the rest of the crowd because Elena asked them to, and because they understood why. I want to say something about those 50 people before I continue, because they deserve to have it said. Those 50 people, in the middle of a crisis, while knowing what they had been told about what a bite wound means, moved away from the group that could protect them toward the position that protected others. They made that choice voluntarily, without coercion, in 118-degree heat in an outdoor pavilion in Phoenix in July. I don't have better words for that than what it is, which is extraordinary. Elena established contact with a man named Marco Ruiz, who is the informal leader of the third group. Marco is 44, he works construction, and he was at the festival with his wife and 2 adult children. His wife is in the first group, uninjured. His son is in the third group with him. His daughter is in the first group. Elena says when she asked Marco how he was doing, he said, "I've been better." Then he said, "We're not going to cause problems for the others. We just need to know if anyone is going to come for us." Marco, I'm going to tell you the same thing I've told everyone tonight who needed to hear it. We are tracking your location. We know you're there. When resources are available to reach you safely, they will reach you. Hold on as long as you can. At 3:27 p.m., the Arizona National Guard was activated by the governor. This is faster than some previous activations I've tracked in other emergencies. And the reason for the speed is that what happened this morning at the research facility in Mesa has been communicated to the governor's office, and the governor understands that what the valley is facing is not a standard mass casualty incident. The Guard mobilization is targeting 4 priority areas: Sky Harbor Airport, the Tempe Marketplace, the Scottsdale Resort Corridor, and Arizona State University. All 4 have high civilian concentrations and active incident status. Timeline for Guard presence on the ground. Jake's contacts estimate 2 to 3 hours, which puts us at 5 to 6 p.m. In July in Phoenix, sunset is around 7:30. That means we get military support approximately 2 hours before dark, which is 2 hours of operational daylight for initial response, and then we move into evening, which in Phoenix in July means the temperature will drop from 118 to approximately 105. Still dangerous, still far outside the range. A human can comfortably survive outside without shelter, but marginally more operational than midday. At 3:31 p.m., Jake is writing on his legal pad and underscoring something. He slides it to me and it says, "The research facility." He's underscored it twice. I nod at him and he nods back because we're thinking the same thing and we need to say it out loud in a moment when it helps rather than panics. Here it is, the research facility in Mesa that had an incident at 6:47 a.m. and conducted prime research is a contained laboratory environment with specific protocols for exactly this kind of event. Whatever happened there this morning, whether it was an accident in handling, a containment breach, or something else, the facility had those protocols because that's what cryo research facilities are required to have. The question Jake's contact couldn't answer, the question that I'm going to ask officially through every channel I have available, is whether the protocols were followed and whether the facility is currently secured and contained. If the answer is yes, the source is locked down, and what we're dealing with in the valley is a finite outbreak from 3 initial external vectors. Terrible and costly, but finite. If the answer is no, if the facility itself is still an active source of contamination, the picture is different in ways I'm not going to describe in detail on this frequency, because that describes a scenario that isn't confirmed, and I will not cause 5 million people to panic based on an unconfirmed scenario. I'm going to keep asking the question, and I'll tell you the answer when I have it. At 3:35 p.m., The SRP grid hit 98% capacity, and a second rolling blackout sequence began, this time hitting the Scottsdale Resort corridor. The resorts on the northeastern edge of Scottsdale are designed for luxury and comfort, and are among the best insulated, best powered buildings in the valley. They have backup generators. They have massive thermal mass in their architecture. They have pools and shade structures and the kind of infrastructure that was built to keep wealthy tourists comfortable in July. What they also have is 12 to 15,000 guests currently sheltered inside them. And the security situation at several of those resorts has been compromised by infected individuals who were among the guests or staff. Jake's contact at Scottsdale PD told him that 2 resorts on the north end of the corridor are reporting contained situations with infected individuals isolated in specific areas of the properties. 2 more are reporting active situations that are not yet contained. And the 5th, a large conference resort that was hosting a technology company's annual meeting with approximately 800 corporate attendees, has lost interior communication and is not responding to police inquiries at all. 800 people in a resort that isn't answering its phones. At 3:39 p.m., a caller reached us. He identified himself as Alejandro, and he said he was at the technology conference resort in Scottsdale, and that he'd been listening to us on his phone while sheltering in a conference room with approximately 60 other people. He said the resort's main building lost power at 3:27 p.m. and hasn't come back. And in the period between the power going out and the emergency lighting engaging, approximately 4 minutes of darkness, something happened in the main ballroom where the conference luncheon was being held, and nobody in the conference room where he is now wants to describe it in detail, except to say that people ran from the ballroom toward the exit corridors, and some of them had bite wounds, and some of those people are now in rooms throughout the hotel that are locked from the inside. Alejandro, how many people do you have confirmed safe in the conference room with you? He said 61. He said the room has no windows, but it has a commercial-grade door that he believes is secure. And they have 4 cases of bottled water from the conference supplies and snacks that were set up for the afternoon break. He said the backup power has restored climate control to the room. He said 61 people are sitting in a conference room in Scottsdale, and they've been listening to this broadcast for the past 30 minutes, and they want to know if anyone is coming. Alejandro, the National Guard is 2 to 3 hours from deployment in the valley, and Scottsdale is one of the 4 priority areas. 2 to 3 hours. I need 61 people in a conference room in Scottsdale to hear me say that the Guard is coming. Climate control is working. Your food and water supply is adequate, and your door is secure. 2 to 3 hours is not long. You've already been in that room for over an hour. You're more than halfway to help arriving. He said, I'll tell them. At 3:43 p.m., the temperature reading from Jake's car thermometer, which he checks every 30 minutes because Jake Torres was born and raised in Phoenix and monitors ambient temperature. The way people in coastal cities monitor weather had dropped by 1 degree to 117. This is meaningless on its own. But the afternoon high in Phoenix in July typically peaks around 3 p.m. and begins a slow decline toward the evening. By 7 p.m., with the sun lower, the temperature will be around 107. By midnight, it will be around 92. By 4 a.m., the genuinely coolest part of the night, around 84. None of those temperatures are safe for extended outdoor exposure without protection. All of them are lower than 118. And every degree downward that the thermometer moves accelerates the timeline toward the operating window for emergency services while slowing the operational capacity of infected outside. The desert is going to work for us tonight, the same way it works against us every July afternoon. The heat that has been the enemy of Phoenix since the first person decided to build a city in the Sonoran Desert is going to be our weapon tonight. We just have to survive until the temperature drops. At 3:51 p.m., Elena broke her own rule about staying behind the door. I want to describe exactly what happened and why. Because Elena Cruz made a decision at 3:51 p.m. that cost her the safety of her position and that I argued against for 45 seconds before I understood that I was wrong and she was right, which are 45 seconds I'm going to think about for a long time. Marco Ruiz's son, whose name is Danny. He's 21 years old, and he was at the festival with his family, went into cardiac arrest in the east end of the pavilion. He'd been bitten more severely than his father, and the progression, combined with the heat inside the pavilion, which Elena estimated at approximately 95 degrees, despite the shade structures, had been faster than any of them expected. He collapsed at 3:48 p.m., and a nurse who was in the first group, a woman named Christine, who works at Banner Desert and was at the festival with her sister, heard the commotion and came to the window and told Elena that without defibrillation, Danny Ruiz had approximately 4 minutes. Elena had a fire extinguisher. She had the defibrillator that was in the staff corridor behind her door, still in its mounted cabinet on the wall, exactly where it was supposed to be. She could see it from where she was standing. She asked me what to do. I told her not to open the door. I told her that opening the door compromised her position and potentially everyone behind it. I told her I didn't know if there was a way to get the defibrillator to Danny without opening the door. I told her I was sorry. There was a pause. Then she said, "I'm going to open the door." She said it in a tone that told me she'd already made the decision and was telling me as a courtesy. She said, "I'm going to open it 6 inches, pass through the defibrillator to Christine, and close it again." And she said, "David, I can hear his father out there." She opened the door, passed the defibrillator through in 10 seconds, and locked it again. Christine used the defibrillator at 3:53 p.m. It required 2 cycles. Danny Ruiz's heart restarted at 3:57 p.m. He's alive. He's in transition regardless. Nothing changes that. But he's alive for now, and his father is with him, and Christine, who spent her Saturday at a summer arts festival, is earning whatever comes after this in ways most of us will never approach. At 4:01 p.m., Jake's scanner activity has increased significantly as guard units begin movement toward the valley from their armory positions. Jake is tracking 4 separate unit movements on 3 different frequencies and writing positions and ETAs on his legal pad with the focus of a man who knows that coordination is what saves people, and nobody coordinates better than someone who's been doing radio for 28 years. He looks up at me occasionally and slides the pad over, and I read off what he's written, which is how this broadcast is working. The 2 of us running this frequency like a 2-man crew running a ship in a storm, each doing what they do best and trusting the other to cover what they can't reach. At 4:04 p.m., the Mesa Research Facility situation was resolved in the most important sense, which is to say Jake's contact confirmed the facility is locked down and secured. The initial incident at 6:47 a.m. has been contained at the source. The 3 individuals who left before lockdown are the only vectors from the facility, and all 3 have been accounted for in the incident data the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office has been building since this morning. The source is closed. What's happening in the valley right now is the consequence of those 3 vectors, not ongoing contamination from the facility. I broadcast that immediately, and I'm going to broadcast it again right now because it changes the mathematical picture significantly. The source is contained. The infection spreading through the valley today is a finite wave from 3 initial vectors. Every infection that happens from this point forward is a 2nd or 3rd or 4th generation from those 3 people. No new infections are being introduced from the facility. The wave will peak and decline based on how effectively we can reduce new bites. And the heat is helping us do that by degrading infected who are exposed to outdoor temperatures. The wave has a ceiling. It will not consume everyone. At 4:08 p.m., the University of Arizona Medical Center in Tucson called the station. Tucson is 112 miles south of Phoenix. a separate metropolitan area of approximately 1 million people, and the reason they're calling is that they've received 3 patients from Phoenix who drove south on I-10 before the emergency protocols were established and who were infected before leaving the city. All 3 patients progressed to transition at the Tucson Medical Center, creating a secondary incident at that facility that is currently being managed. The caller, a hospital administrator, wanted us to broadcast a warning that Tucson is aware and managing, and that anyone driving south from Phoenix to Tucson for safety should understand that Tucson has active incident management as well. The I-10 corridor, 112 miles of desert highway between Phoenix and Tucson, the only major road connecting the 2 cities. Jake drew a line on his map between the 2 cities and looked at me with the specific expression of someone doing math they don't enjoy. At 4:12 p.m., the Arizona Department of Transportation began implementing lane closures on I-10 in both directions between Phoenix and Tucson. This is simultaneously necessary for incident management and a problem of the first order for the hundreds of thousands of people who are currently trying to use that highway to evacuate in one direction or another. If I-10 closes and SR 85 and US 60 are both gridlocked from Phoenix area traffic trying to find alternatives, the Phoenix metro area becomes an island of 5 million people in the Sonoran Desert with 117-degree temperatures and a zombie outbreak and no way out. The desert has always been the final argument against leaving Phoenix in the wrong direction. Tonight, it's the argument against leaving in any direction. At 4:15 p.m., I received a call from a listener who didn't give her name, but who said she was at a retirement community in Sun City, which is on the northwestern edge of the valley. She said she's 81 years old. She's lived in Sun City for 16 years, and she has 15 neighbors who are gathered at her house right now because they saw what was happening and organized themselves. She said they have 1 car between them with a full tank of gas. They have medications for various conditions, they have water, and they have a group chat that's been active since 2 p.m. sharing information across the retirement community. She said the average age in her immediate group is 74. She said 2 of them can't walk without assistance. She said they're not going anywhere. They've made that decision. And what they need to know is what they should do to hold their position. She said it like a general assessing terrain, like someone who has been alive for 81 years in a state that requires you to respect the conditions of your environment, who has internalized that survival is about preparation and patience, and not making the crisis worse by doing something dramatic that wastes resources. She said, "We're not scared. We're organized. Just tell us what we need to know." I told her everything. I told her the infection spreads only through bites, not air or casual contact. I told her the heat is degrading infected faster than normal temperatures would. I told her to lock every entry point, keep interior temperatures down, ration water carefully, and not to open doors to anyone until they can verify through a window or by voice that the person outside is uninjured. I told her the guard is 2 hours out, and Sun City is a residential community with low infected concentration compared to commercial areas. I told her she was in a good position. She said, "We know. We just needed confirmation." Then she said she'd call back in an hour with an update, and she said it in the tone of someone who is going to do exactly that. At 4:19 p.m., Elena's pavilion situation evolved in a way I hadn't anticipated. The crowd of approximately 400 people in the first group has organized itself into something resembling a functional community. In the past 45 minutes, Christine, the nurse from Banner Desert, has established a medical assessment protocol, checking everyone in the first group for bites they might have minimized or missed. A man who identified himself as a former Army sergeant named William Patterson has organized 12 adults into a perimeter watch, spreading them around the pavilion walls with instructions to call out any infected approach. A woman named Priya, who works in logistics and who apparently cannot stop logistics brain thinking even during a crisis, has inventoried every vending machine in the pavilion area. and determined that they have approximately 90 hours of water and 60 hours of food for 450 people if rationing begins immediately. Elena told me this, and then she said, "David, I want you to know something. These people were terrified 2 hours ago. All of them. And now they're running a perimeter and rationing supplies and triaging injuries. And they did all of this themselves. I didn't do any of it. I just told them the truth through a broken window. I told her, 'Elena, you've been broadcasting from a field position for 2 hours and 4 minutes. You've been doing exactly what we do.' She laughed. In 117 degrees, behind a locked door, in the middle of a crisis, Elena Cruz laughed. And it was the best radio I've produced in my career." At 4:23 p.m., Dr. Kim called back with updated clinical observations. She said the degradation in the heat is even more pronounced than her initial estimate. She's now observing that infected individuals who are exposed to outdoor Phoenix temperatures for more than 25 minutes showed severe tissue damage that significantly compromised their motor function before they would have naturally reached the degradation stage. She said she believes that in the current heat conditions, infected are functionally incapacitated by outdoor exposure within 30 minutes, rather than the 90-minute baseline she cited earlier. 30 minutes outside in 117 degrees, and the infected are stopping. This is the most important tactical piece of information of the entire broadcast. Every building that has remained secure for the past 30 minutes, every building that is climate controlled and has locked exterior doors, is in a dramatically better position than it was 30 minutes ago. Every infected individual who transitioned outdoors or who has been outdoors for more than 30 minutes is now significantly degraded or stopped entirely. The outdoor infected population is collapsing faster than anyone predicted. Jake underlined it 3 times on the legal pad, and then he stood up and said, "Tell them again. If you are inside a secured, climate-controlled building right now, you are safer than you were 30 minutes ago. The infected outside your building are deteriorating faster than expected due to the heat. Every minute you remain secured is a minute the outdoor threat reduces. You do not need to run. You do not need to evacuate. You need to stay exactly where you are and wait, because the desert is doing the work for you." At 4:27 p.m., the temperature on Jake's car thermometer had dropped to 115 degrees. The sun is beginning its slow descent toward the Estrella Mountains on the western horizon. Phoenix is starting a long process of becoming survivable again. The wave is cresting. Stay inside. We're getting there. At 4:39 p.m., a National Guard advance element arrived at Tempe Marketplace ahead of the main deployment timeline. Jake's contact, who'd been giving him unit positions, flagged it before the official announcement came through, which meant this frequency announced it to the valley approximately 4 minutes before the emergency management alert went out. In 4 minutes, a lot of people who were counting on the sound of something changing made their first decision to believe it. 60 soldiers from the Guard's East Valley Armory in Mesa, coordinating with Tempe PD, established a perimeter around the marketplace complex and began sector assessment. Kate at our sister station, whose helicopter I'd been borrowing visual access to through an audio feed she'd generously been running to our board, confirmed the Guard arrival from altitude and described the military vehicles pulling into the parking structure access points as the most welcome thing she'd seen since she launched. The first thing the Guard did upon establishing perimeter was contact Elena Cruz. Elena had been at her position for 2 hours and 26 minutes. She had not left the staff corridor. She had managed communication with approximately 450 people through a broken window, facilitated the organization of a functional survival community, coordinated the voluntary separation of exposed individuals, and passed a defibrillator through a 6-inch door opening to save a man who was in cardiac arrest. She had done all of this in a staff corridor in an outdoor shopping complex in 117 degrees with a bottle of water she'd brought for a light feature segment about summer art. When the guard sergeant made contact with her through the door gap and told her she was the first contact point for civilian evacuation, she apparently said, "I have 415 uninjured in the South Pavilion, 42 possibly exposed in the center section, and 51 confirmed bite wounds in the East End who are in various stages of progression." She said, "The East section needs immediate medical and immediate separation from the rest." The nurse handling medical assessment is Christine. I don't have her last name. She's in a green blouse and she'll brief your medical officer. She said, "There are also approximately 5,000 other people distributed throughout the rest of the complex, and I've been communicating with them through the intercom system and 2 phone chains, and most of them know to shelter in place and wait." The guard sergeant said, "Ma'am, are you military?" Elena said, "No, I'm a radio reporter." At 4:43 p.m., Jake said to me, "She's going to be doing this broadcast someday." I said, "She's been doing it all afternoon." He nodded and went back to his scanner. The marketplace evacuation began at 4:47 p.m. in organized stages. Guard units moving through sectors with Tempe PD support, extracting uninjured civilians to staging areas in the east parking structure where buses were being positioned. The heat inside the parking structure was significant, but manageable with water distribution that guard units brought with them, and the structure provided full shade from the still intense afternoon sun. At 4:51 p.m., Marco Ruiz and Danny Ruiz and the 50 other members of the East End group were extracted through a separate route, under medical supervision, to an isolated staging area where military medical personnel could assess them individually. Danny Ruiz was alive and conscious, and according to Elena, who watched through the door gap as the guard team made contact, was holding his father's hand. Marco Ruiz, when the guard medic assessed him, was still in the early symptom phase. His timeline was longer than his son's due to a less severe bite, and the medical team had options they were exercising. At 4:54 p.m., Elena came out of the staff corridor into daylight for the first time in 2.5 hours. She called me immediately. She said, "It's still incredibly hot out here." I told her it was 116 degrees and declining. She said, "Declining sounds good." I told her to find water and shade and that there would be time for everything else later. She said, "David, I have so many notes from Monday's show." I said we'd figure out Monday on Monday. At 4:58 p.m., I want to do something I've been meaning to do since Jake arrived, and which I keep pushing because the situation keeps demanding more immediate things. I want to talk to you directly about what 99.7 FM is and why Jake Torres drove across Phoenix at 2 in the afternoon on a July Saturday in the middle of a heat emergency and an outbreak to come sit at a secondary board and run a scanner. Jake has been doing Phoenix radio since before the Valley had 1 million people in it. He's watched it grow from a mid-sized southwestern city to one of the largest metropolitan areas in the country, and he's watched the relationship between local radio and its community change and bend, and sometimes break as the industry changed around it. He's told me more than once that the thing local radio has that nothing else has is that it's there, not algorithmically tailored to you based on your listening history, not behind a paywall, not dependent on cellular data or app loading times, just there on the frequency for whoever needs it. An 81-year-old woman in Sun City and a 26-year-old reporter behind a locked door and a construction worker from Mesa holding his son's hand and 61 corporate attendees in a conference room in Scottsdale, all of them listening to the same signal on whatever radio was nearest. If this broadcast has helped you get through today, if the information we've been providing since 2:14 p.m. has changed what you did, or where you went, or what decisions you made, then you know what local radio is worth. And when this is over, when the Valley is recovering and the investigation is ongoing, and the normal days eventually become normal again, I hope you'll remember what 99.7 FM was doing on the afternoon of the worst day the Phoenix metro area has ever experienced. Not because we need something from you, because Jake Torres deserves to know that the 28 years he's been showing up are worth something to this city. At 5:03 p.m., the temperature dropped to 114 degrees. The first time we've been below 115 since early morning, and the first time the grid load projections from SRP showed any sign of relief. The third rolling blackout sequence, which had been threatening the Northwest Valley, was averted when the load dropped below 95% capacity. Jake's medical contact at Banner University told him that their emergency department, which had been managing overflow from the outbreak incidents, was now receiving significantly fewer new bite victims, which is consistent with the heat degradation model Dr. Kim described. The rate of new infections is dropping. At 5:07 p.m., the Sun City listener called back, exactly as she said she would. She said 15 neighbors, all present and accounted for, no incidents. Interior temperature holding at 74 degrees on the thermostat. Water consumption on schedule, medications distributed for the evening doses, and someone has made sandwiches. She said, the sandwiches are turkey. She said this in the tone of someone who considers turkey sandwiches a logistical success worthy of reporting. I told her it was the best update I'd received all afternoon. She said she'd call back in another hour. I have no doubt that she will. At 5:11 p.m., Jake's scanner picked up a conversation between Guard Command and Scottsdale PD that he passed to me in real time on a legal pad. The Technology Conference Resort in North Scottsdale, the one with 800 attendees and no phone communication, and 61 people in a conference room, including Alejandro, had been accessed by a Guard reconnaissance unit. Their initial assessment was that the main ballroom incident was contained to the ballroom, that the hotel's structure had prevented spread beyond 3 areas of the property, and that the vast majority of the 800 attendees were sheltering in rooms throughout the hotel in conditions that were uncomfortable due to the partial power loss, but not immediately dangerous. They also confirmed that 61 people in a conference room on the 3rd floor were secure and had food and water and were listening to a radio broadcast. The recon unit said the people in that conference room knew more about the current situation than the guard sergeant did. Jake wrote on the legal pad, of course they do. At 5:15 p.m., Alejandro called in. He'd been monitoring the broadcast when the guard made contact through their door, and the first thing the sergeant said when Alejandro cracked the door was, "You the ones listening to 99.7? Alejandro said yes. The sergeant said, "And you know more than I do. Tell me about your building." Alejandro said the room erupted in something that was partially laughter, and partially the release of 2.5 hours of concentrated fear, and that it took about 30 seconds for everyone to stop making noise, and then 61 people started talking at once trying to give the sergeant the situation report. He said, "David, these people were ready. They'd been preparing what they'd say to the rescue team since about 4 p.m. They had it written down. Someone had a whiteboard, and they'd been filling it in as you gave updates." I thought about 61 corporate attendees in a powerless conference room in Scottsdale, using their company's whiteboard to track a zombie outbreak briefing from a Phoenix FM station, and I thought that might be the most Arizona thing I've ever heard. At 5:19 p.m., the Guard main deployment reached the valley in force. Over 400 soldiers across 7 entry points, establishing coordinated operations with Phoenix PD, Scottsdale PD, Tempe PD, Mesa PD, and MCSO. The operation is named in Guard communication as Operation Desert Recovery, which is either the most on the nose or the most perfect name possible, and I've decided not to choose. At 5:23 p.m., Dr. Kim called for the 3rd time with what she's calling a definitive heat degradation update. She has now observed 17 complete cycles of infected from transition to immobility and confirmed the following. In current outdoor Phoenix temperatures, infected reach complete functional immobility in an average of 28 minutes from transition. The range is 22 to 34 minutes. She said this is consistent across all observed cases, and she considers it reliable data. 28 minutes outside in this heat, and the infected stop. She said, tell everyone with a secured building that the outdoor threat will be effectively neutralized before sunset. When the sun goes down tonight, what remains on the streets is degraded infected that are functionally immobile or in very late degradation stages. The mobile threat in outdoor spaces is ending before dark. Jake stood up when I read that out. He didn't say anything. He just stood up and exhaled the way a person exhales when something very heavy has been set down. At 5:27 p.m., the situation across the valley, as compiled by Jake from his 4 hours of scanner monitoring and contact calls, looks like this. The Tempe marketplace is being evacuated in organized stages and is expected to be fully cleared by 7 p.m. The Scottsdale Resort Corridor has guard presence at all 5 major properties and civilian extractions are underway. Arizona State University has guard units on campus, and the 8,000-person summer population is being organized for shelter-in-place with military security. The Camelback Corridor commercial area has been cleared by a combination of police and advanced guard units. Sky Harbor Airport is secured with military presence and will resume limited operations tomorrow morning. Sun City has turkey sandwiches. The wave that started at 6:47 a.m. at a research facility in Mesa, that moved through 3 people into a city of 5 million. That hit the marketplace and the resorts and the university and the airport and the neighborhoods and the highways. That wave is breaking against the desert heat that has always been the final word on what happens in Phoenix. The desert is not romantic about it. It doesn't care what it's killing. It just removes the conditions necessary for survival, and everything that needs those conditions stops. Today, that included the infected. Today, it included them before it included us. Not every outbreak gets to say that. Phoenix gets to say it tonight. At 5:38 p.m., the temperature was 111 degrees, and the sun was visibly lower. The light going from the brutal flat white of July afternoon toward the copper and red that Phoenix does in the evening in a way that photographers come from everywhere to see. If you've ever stood on Camelback Mountain at sunset in July and watched the light hit the Sonoran Desert, you know what I mean? The valley looks different at sunset than anywhere else on Earth, like the land itself is exhaling after holding its breath all day. Tonight the sun is going down over a city that survived something that the land itself helped destroy, and the light is going to be exactly the same impossible copper and red that it always is. Elena Cruz made it to a guard staging area at 5:34 p.m. and was given water and medical assessment and declared physically fine, which is the medical conclusion and not the whole truth, because 2.5 hours behind a locked door while monitoring a crisis is a thing that lives in the body differently than physically fine suggests. She called me from the staging area, and the first thing she said was that she wanted to talk about what happened with Danny Ruiz and whether she made the right call opening the door. I told her she'd been making right calls all afternoon, and that one was no different. She said she needed to think about it for a while. I said that was also right. At 5:42 p.m., Jake's scanner picked up the guard medical frequency, confirming that Danny Ruiz was in treatment at a field medical unit and was stable, which is a medical term that in this context means he is still in transition, but his vital signs are being managed, and he is being treated with the aggressive wound decontamination protocol that Dr. Kim has been refining all afternoon. Marco Ruiz is with him. Marco's bite was less severe. His timeline has been extended by the decontamination treatment he received after Elena passed Christine the defibrillator. And Dr. Kim's team is monitoring him with what she described in a brief call to Jake as cautious optimism, which is as far as she go, and probably as far as she should. I'm not going to tell you Danny Ruiz is going to be okay. I don't know if he is. I'm going to tell you that a guard medical team in a Tempe parking structure is working on him, and his amas, father, is next to him, and medicine is trying. And that is what medicine can do, and it's worth something. At 5:46 p.m., I received a call that I want to describe in full because it belongs in the record of today. The caller identified himself as Dr. Felix Sandoval, the director of the Mesa Research Facility where the outbreak began at 6:47 m. He asked if he could speak on the air, and I said yes, and what he said was this. He said, "I want to take full responsibility for what happened at our facility this morning. We had a containment protocol breach involving handling procedures during a specimen transfer. 2 of our researchers were exposed before the breach was classified and contained, and by the time I made the decision to lock down the facility, 3 individuals had left the campus. I want the people of the Phoenix metro area to know that the source has been contained since 9 a.m., and that our facility cooperated fully with the Maricopa County Sheriff from the moment they were notified. I want them to know that 2 of our researchers died in the service of science that was intended to help people. I want them to know that I am sorry for the consequences that fell on this city today, and that I will spend whatever time I have remaining explaining myself to whoever needs that explanation." I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, "Dr. Sandoval, does the public need to know anything else about this facility for their safety tonight?" He said, "No. What is here is contained. What left here this morning is the extent of what left here. The valley is dealing with a finite outbreak from a contained source. I give you that as a fact because you and the people listening deserve facts." I thanked him. I don't know what will happen to Dr. Sandoval and his facility in the legal and regulatory accounting that's going to follow what happened today. That's not tonight's question. Tonight's question is getting the valley through to morning, and Dr. Sandoval's statement answered the one remaining question about the scale of what we're facing. At 5:51 p.m., a guard completed its first full sector assessment of the Phoenix metro area, and the summary Jake received from his contact is as follows. Total confirmed infected individuals identified across the metropolitan area, 347. Neutralized through military and law enforcement action, 219. Immobilized through heat degradation, 101. Currently active and mobile, 27. 27 active mobile infected, remaining in the entire Phoenix metro area, down from an estimated peak of approximately 200 at the 3 p.m. crisis point. The math is working. At 5:55 p.m., I want to tell you something about Phoenix that I've been thinking about all afternoon, while I sat at this microphone and watched the city deal with the worst thing it's ever had to deal with. Phoenix is a city that shouldn't exist. Not as a judgment, as a geographical fact. The Sonoran Desert does not naturally sustain 5 million people. It sustains saguaro cactus and gila woodpeckers, and coyotes and javelinas, and the occasional roadrunner, and not very much else at this density. Phoenix exists because humans decided it would exist, and built the water infrastructure and the power infrastructure and the cooling infrastructure to make a city viable in a place where the basic conditions for city-scale human life were absent. The entire city is a maintained argument against the desert's preference for who lives here. That's not a weakness. That's the most remarkable act of sustained collective will in the American Southwest. Every person who lives in Phoenix has implicitly agreed to the proposition that you can build something permanent in a place that doesn't want permanent things, as long as you respect the conditions and maintain the systems, and don't ever, for even a moment, pretend the desert isn't still out there waiting. Today the desert waited, and then it helped. The heat that makes Phoenix the most challenging city in America to live in during July came for the infected the same way it comes for everything that isn't prepared for it. Without mercy. Without negotiation. Without any particular interest in what the infected would have preferred. Phoenix built itself to survive the desert. Today the desert helped Phoenix survive something the desert didn't care about one way or another. I find that in a day with very little that I find anything worth noting. At 5:58 p.m., the Sun City listener called back for the second time. 15 people, all accounted for. Turkey sandwich is finished, someone is making coffee, temperature holding steady, and she has a question. She said she's been listening to this broadcast since about 2:30, and she wants to know when they can go outside. I told her the Guard would be conducting residential security assessments in Northwest Valley communities, starting at approximately 7 p.m., when the main deployment is fully operational. I told her their community should expect Guard contact by 8 to 9 p.m. I told her that after Guard clearance, they can assess outdoor movement, but that even after clearance, the heat remains dangerous and any outdoor activity should be brief and hydrated. She said, "We know about the heat. We've been here for 16 years. I know you do. I just have to say it." She said, "I know you do. We appreciate it." She said she'd call one more time when the Guard arrived. I told her I'd be here. At 6:03 p.m., Elena arrived at our station. Jake had told me she was coming. One of his contacts in the Guard staging area had arranged transportation, and she walked in looking like someone who had been behind a locked door in an outdoor shopping complex in July for 2.5 hours, and then evacuated through a Guard staging area and driven across Phoenix, which is what she had been. She sat down at the secondary board and put on headphones, and Jake handed her a scanner, and she started monitoring without saying a word, because Elena Cruz does the thing that needs doing and talks about it later. She looked over at me at 6:05 p.m. and said, "Marco Ruiz called me. He said Danny is stable. Stable the way that has hope in it, not just the medical word. He said when Danny was conscious for a few minutes, he asked his father if he could hear music somewhere. Marco said there wasn't any music. Danny said he could have sworn he heard music. Marco called me because he wanted me to know, and I don't know what he wanted me to do with that information, but I'm going to carry it. I'm going to carry it too." At 6:09 p.m., the temperature registered at 108 degrees on Jake's thermometer. The sun is 45 minutes from the horizon. The copper light is doing what it does in the valley in July when you've earned the right to watch it. The Guard has 27 mobile infected, remaining across 5 million people and 14,000 square miles and 108 degrees. At 6:13 p.m., a listener called who had been in one of the neighborhoods near the Camelback corridor when it started. His name is James, and he's 73, and he has a neighbor who was bitten at 3 p.m., and who James has been sitting with since 3:15 p.m., because he said he wasn't going to let his neighbor be alone. He said they've been listening to this broadcast together, him and his neighbor is progressing, but is still James's neighbor right now, still able to talk, still himself in the ways that matter even as other things change. James said his neighbor's name is Sam, and Sam has asked him to tell the radio that Sam is not scared and that he hopes the Cardinals have a decent season this year. James's voice was steady when he said that. The kind of steady that costs everything. "Sam, we heard you, and we're all hoping about the Cardinals." At 6:17 p.m., the last rolling blackout sequence passed without triggering. SRP load was back below 91% and declining as the temperature dropped, and businesses and residences began normal early evening power behavior. The grid held. The air conditioning held. The 5 million people who needed climate-controlled buildings to survive both the heat and the outbreak had those buildings tonight, and the buildings held. In Phoenix, that is never a given. Tonight, it was given. At 6:21 p.m., the FBI field office in Phoenix made contact with the station, same as Fort Worth, same as every large-scale incident, because the federal investigative process and the public communication process both need to run, and they're not the same process. The agent who called was professional and precise, and asked us to preserve all recordings and communications, which Jake had already done, and asked us to confirm the Dr. Sandoval call and its content, which I confirmed. She said the federal investigation into the research facility and its containment breach would be thorough and would take time and would be public, which is the only appropriate outcome. I told her I'd stay available for whatever she needed. She thanked me and ended the call, And the professionalism of that conversation somehow made the whole day feel more real, the way official acknowledgement turns event into record. At 6:25 p.m., Elena looked up from her scanner and said, "David, I'm going to need you to take over monitoring for about 15 minutes." She opened her reporter's notebook and started writing. She wrote continuously for exactly 14 minutes, then closed the notebook and said, "Okay." I asked what she'd written. She said, "The story, the one I'm going to file on Monday." She said, "I didn't want to lose the way things felt before I'd had enough time to not feel them anymore. That's the best definition of reporting I've ever heard. Write it down before the feeling leaves." At 6:29 p.m., the guard count of active mobile infected across the Phoenix metro area was updated to 7, down from 27. 3 hours ago, and from an estimated 200 at peak. 7 mobile infected in 14,000 square miles of desert, as the sun prepares to set over the Estrella Mountains and the temperature drops toward double digits for the first time since 6 this morning. The wave is not broken against the shore. The wave evaporated in the desert heat, which is what happens in Arizona to things that didn't plan for the desert. At 6:44 p.m., the sun touched the Estrella Mountains on the western edge of the valley. Jake's thermometer read 105 degrees, which in Phoenix in July, at 6:44 p.m. in the evening, is a thing that would normally prompt no particular comment from anyone who lives here. Tonight, it prompted Jake Torres, who was born in South Mountain and has never once in 28 years of Phoenix radio been surprised by the weather, to look out the studio window at the sky and say, "There it is. There it is. The copper and red and impossible amber of a Phoenix sunset after a July day. The same light that photographers fly in for. The same light that convinced people 2,000 years ago that this desert valley was worth building something in. The same light that has absolutely nothing to do with what happened today, and at the same time is entirely about it, because this city exists because of that light and because of the heat that precedes it, and because of the people who decided to stay anyway." The guard's mobile infected count dropped to 4 at 6:47 p.m., 2 at 6:52 p.m., 0 confirmed mobile at 7:04 p.m., 0. The outdoor infected population of the Phoenix metropolitan area has been fully degraded or neutralized. No active mobile infected confirmed anywhere in the 5-city metro area. The guard commander on the Joint Operations Frequency that Jake has been monitoring said, in the flat tactical tone that military communication uses for everything, including the moments that deserve something more, "Area clear." And then, after a pause that I think was human rather than tactical, "Area clear." At 7:08 p.m., I want to tell you what the final accounting looks like, as much as I have it, because the people affected by today deserve to have it said plainly, and the people who survived need to understand what they survived. Confirmed infected in the Phoenix metro area throughout today's outbreak, 347. Civilian fatalities. The number is still being established, but current estimates from the Maricopa County Medical Examiner are between 80 and 120 individuals from a combination of infection, heat exposure during evacuation, and crowd incidents during the panic period at the marketplace and Camelback corridor. Emergency responder casualties, 9 injuries, 3 fatalities among Phoenix PD and MCSO officers in the early incident period before tactical protocols were adapted. Guard casualties, 4 soldiers with bite wounds, all in treatment, all in the aggressive decontamination protocol that Dr. Kim has been refining. Between 80 and 120 people. Families are going to receive calls tonight and tomorrow that they are not prepared for. Phoenix is going to grieve in a specific way that cities grieve, which is both collectively and in a million separate private rooms where the loss is just one person, and that one person is everything. James and Sam. Sam is not in the numbers yet, because Sam was still Sam at 6:21 p.m., and I'm going to believe that for as long as I can. Sam hopes the Cardinals have a decent season. So do I, Sam. At 7:13 p.m., Delana put her headphones down and looked at me and said, "I want to say something on air." I handed her the microphone, and she said, "My name is Elena Cruz. I've been a field reporter at this station for 2 years. Today I was behind a locked door in the South Pavilion at Tempe Marketplace for 2 hours and 26 minutes. And I told people the truth through a broken window, because that was what I had." A woman named Christine in a green blouse did medicine with the equipment available to her and saved a man's life in a shopping pavilion in July. A man named Marco moved to the east end of the pavilion to protect people he'd never met. 415 people decided that organizing was more useful than panicking. I want them to know that I saw all of it. I want them to know I wrote it down. And I want them to know that when they ask themselves later whether they did the right thing, the answer is yes. The answer is unambiguously yes. She put the microphone down, and Jake started clapping, which in 28 years of broadcasting, I have never seen Jake Torres do, and which tells you something about Elena Cruz and something about today. At 7:17 p.m., the guard completed initial sector clearance of the Tempe Marketplace and declared the complex secured. The evacuation had processed approximately 5,800 civilians through the staging area, and the last buses departed at 7:14 p.m. The complex itself sustained significant damage in several areas and will require extensive assessment before any reopening. But the structure stands and the art that was on display in the festival, the paintings and ceramics and photographs that 6,000 people came to see on a July Saturday, most of it is still there, dusty and displaced, and in some cases damaged by the afternoon's events, but mostly there. Priya, the logistics woman who inventoried the vending machines and calculated 90 hours of water, is apparently going to bill the marketplace for the vending machine contents consumed during the emergency. Elena told me this with the specific admiration of someone who recognizes an unyielding professional when she sees one. At 7:22 p.m., Dr. Kim called for the 4th time today. She said Danny Ruiz has been moved to Banner University Medical Center for continued treatment. She said his vital signs are improving. She said the timeline of his progression appears to have been significantly slowed by the decontamination treatment applied by Christine in the pavilion and continued by the guard medical team, and that his case, combined with Marco's, represents the most promising data set she has for the effectiveness of the mitigation protocol. She said she's going to spend the next week writing it up for emergency publication, because what was learned in a shopping pavilion in Tempe today might matter to the next city that faces this. She said she wants Christine identified so she can be named in the paper. Elena said she has Christine's contact information because of course she does. At 7:27 p.m., the Sun City listener called back for the 3rd and final time. She said the guard arrived at 7:19 p.m., conducted their assessment in about 12 minutes, and declared their community secure. She said one of the soldiers was a young man who grew up in Sun City and whose grandmother still lived 3 streets over, and when this young man realized where he was, he asked his sergeant if he could take 5 minutes to check on her, and the sergeant said yes, and the young man went 3 streets over and knocked on his grandmother's door, and she answered, and it turned out she was one of the 15 people who'd been in the Sun City listener's house all afternoon eating turkey sandwiches. The Sun City listener said she gave the young man a sandwich for his grandmother and told him to bring it with care. He did. She said, "I'm going to go to bed now. It's almost dark, and the heat is finally reasonable, and I'm 81 years old, and today was a long day." She said, "You did good, David. Tell the young woman who was behind the door that she did good too." "I'll tell her. Good night." She said, "Good night." Then she hung up, and I have never once in 15 years of Phoenix radio heard someone hang up with that particular kind of finality that comes from a thing being complete. At 7:31 p.m., the sun set over the Estrella Mountains and the valley, went into the blue hour that follows a July sunset in Arizona, and the temperature was down to 103 degrees and falling, and the guard was on the streets, and the hospitals were receiving their last acute cases of the day, and 5 million people were doing what 5 million people who've been through something do, which is start making calls and start assessing what happened and start figuring out how to put the next day together. Jake Torres shut down his legal pad at 7:33 p.m. He's filled 14 pages. He folded the pad closed and said, "You're going to be okay for the rest of the night?" I said yes. He said, "I'm going to drive home and sit in my backyard in the dark for about an hour, which is what I do when things have been too much. And then I'm going to come back and take the overnight if you need a break." I said he didn't have to do that. He said, "I know." He put on his jacket, picked up his scanner, and walked out, and I could hear his footsteps in the hallway, and then the door. And then it was just me and Elena at 99.7 FM. Elena was writing in her notebook again. She writes in a physical notebook, the way people in their 20s only do when they learn from someone who believed in it, and whoever taught her to report, taught her well. At 7:38 p.m., I want to tell you what Phoenix is going to look like tomorrow. Not in the investigation sense, not in the policy sense, not in the federal accountability sense that Dr. Sandoval is going to have to navigate. In the practical human sense. Tomorrow, people are going to drive through the Camelback corridor and see the police tape and the damage, and they're going to think about what happened there. They're going to drive past the Tempe marketplace and think about the arts festival that turned into something else. They're going to fill up at the gas station and see other people filling up at the gas station. And they're going to make eye contact in the way people make eye contact after something has been shared, the particular acknowledgement between strangers who have been through the same thing, the nod that says, "I know. I was here too." Phoenix is going to do what Phoenix always does, which is decide if the desert hasn't beaten it yet and keep building. The marketplace will reopen. The resorts will reopen. The research will continue under different protocols and with federal oversight and with the permanent understanding of what a containment breach costs. But it will continue because the science that was being done there matters to people who get the diseases that science is trying to treat. The investigation will conclude. The grief will settle into the shape that grief settles into over time. Not smaller, but different. Integrated into who the city is, rather than sitting on top of it. The guard young man who brought his grandmother a turkey sandwich at 7:19 p.m. is going to remember this July his entire life. So will James. So will Alejandro and his 60 whiteboard-briefed colleagues. So will Christine, who saved Danny Ruiz in a shopping pavilion with a defibrillator that Elena Cruz passed through a 6-inch door opening. So will I. At 7:43 p.m., Elena closed her notebook and looked at me and said, "Do you want to play some music?" I said yes. She said, "What do you want to play?" I said the first thing that came to mind, which was George Strait, because George Strait is what you play when you've been through something and you need the music to know what to do with it. And George Strait always knows what to do with it. Elena pulled it up on the board and I said, "This is 99.7 FM. This is David Morgan. We've been on the air since 2:14 p.m. and we're going to be here until this city doesn't need us to be. And right now what this city needs is 5 minutes of George Strait while the temperature drops and the guard does its work and Phoenix figures out how to be Phoenix again." I pressed play. George Strait started playing. The copper of the sunset was giving way to the deep blue that comes after it in the desert. The blue that arrives clean and vast above the lights of the valley. The blue that makes you understand every night why people stay here despite July. I took a drink of water, the first quiet drink I'd taken since 2:14 p.m. And outside the studio window, Phoenix was settling into evening, and the desert was doing what the desert does, which is go on exactly as it always has, patient and indifferent, and occasionally, just occasionally, exactly what you needed it to be. Hello, listener. We made it. So did Phoenix. So did the desert, which was never in any doubt, but which deserves acknowledgement tonight anyway. This is 99.7 FM. Still here. Still broadcasting. Still yours. Stay hydrated out there. It's Arizona.